Welcome to the Life in the Red podcast presented by the Lincoln Journal-Star, your source for Husker news, analysis, and more. From football in the fall to recruiting in the summer, we've got you covered. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Basnett, Parker Gabriel, and Stephen M. Sipple.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
Sipple's ready. Welcome in. It's the Life in the Red podcast. I'm Chris. There's Sip. There's Parker. It's 4:08 p.m. on Thursday, March 10th, 2022. We're going to hit on some basketball right out of the gate here. I got to go pick up my son from daycare here in a few minutes, so we're going to knock this out. The fellas will talk a little football. They've been immersed in spring ball. I've been immersed in hoops. So let's just get right into it. Nebraska falls at the Big Ten tournament last night to Northwestern, 71-69, led by 15 points, led 50-35 with 15:28 left in the game.
15 points.
Looked great. Looked like they were going to roll into the next round. And then Northwestern threw a zone at them, and it's like they had never seen a zone before. And the lead was gone in about 3 minutes. It was a 14-0 run in a little less than 3 minutes, and then it was a tight game the rest of the way. And we kind of got the full Nebraska basketball experience, right? Like they played great, like they haven't at the end of the year for about the first 25 minutes. In the last 15, they looked like the team that lost 21 games coming in. And we saw it even on the last two shot attempts, two guards just kind of careening into the lane and bouncing off bodies and not getting up a good shot. And you lose and the season's over. So that's where it is. Nebraska finishes 10-22. Kind of a weird finish. They play so great those last three games. They played great for a half of the game against Northwestern, and then just kind of all falls apart. So at the end of the day, it's a 22-loss season. There's not a whole lot of good you can say about it, but Nebraska at least made it fun for the last couple of weeks, and it was just kind of a disappointing anyway.
I got a question that you guys can answer, Baz.
Yeah.
I wasn't keeping play-by-play. I watched the game in its entirety. How many possessions do you think it required Nebraska to adjust to the zone that Collins threw out there? It looked like a 3-2 zone. How long do you think it took Nebraska to adjust to it? Well, I'm serious.
Yeah, I don't know if it was – I don't know how many possessions. It was a few minutes. They got pretty stagnant. They finally – I'm going to get the play-by-play pulled up here so I can kind of get an idea. Look, they were at 15. With 15:28 left, they were at 15. They made 4 field goals the rest of the game. So,
yeah, but Northwestern wasn't in the zone the whole rest of the way, were they?
No, they weren't. The Nebraska eventually got him out of the zone, and so. But it took. I mean, it
took some time.
It took. I mean, Northwestern was back in the game by the time.
It was a great move by Collins.
Yeah, it was. They brought in. I forget the kid's name off the bench, and put him at the top of that 3-2 zone. Just kind of a long kid, long arms. And Nebraska's had a lot of trouble getting into the middle of it. When they did, they got some scoring opportunities. Verge hit a floater. I think McGowan's got one in there. But it just took them a while to kind of get into it and get moving and get the ball moving around. So, yeah, it definitely took a few minutes. It was a great move by Collins.
It was.
And Hoiberg said as much last night, and they didn't adjust fast enough. And with the way Northwestern was shooting the ball, coming out of halftime, it didn't take long for them to get back in the game.
It was a fascinating study in energy because Northwestern's energy in the first half was terrible. I thought it was terrible. It looked like there was something wrong. In the second half, it flipped. And you don't always see that. You do see it sometimes in sports, but it's not unheard of. But the second half looked, from Northwestern's standpoint, the energy picked up dramatically.
It was weird too. And I tweeted this, like coming out of the locker room, like Nebraska looked like the more energetic team coming out of the locker room. Like I'm watching them warming up and they're bouncing around. And I was sitting down on Northwestern side. So they were right in front of me and they were quiet. They were just kind of going through the layup line. There wasn't a whole lot of talk. There wasn't a whole lot of clapping. I'm thinking, man, Nebraska might blow their doors off because Northwestern just looked flat coming out of the locker room. Then they hit 3 or 4 shots in a row, and all of a sudden the energy's back up. So I mean, that was just how quick it turned. I thought it was going to be a Nebraska blowout early in that when those teams came out of the locker room. But great Northwestern, they hit some shots. Nebraska made some mistakes on defense. Their energy on defense dropped. They kind of started reverting back to some old bad habits that they had on both ends of the floor, and Northwestern hit shots, and that just flipped the whole game. Those first few minutes of the second half.
Okay, now what? When will will Fred address the media at some point soon?
Probably not in a group setting. No. Spring breaks next week, of course. We're going to have to, he's been asked about the supposed plan and the supposed changes that he will make to the program in the offseason. Hasn't really said a whole lot as you would expect. So yeah. So he'll talk about it at some point, and certainly we'll ask him about it at some point, but I think it's going to be relatively quiet here, probably through the rest of this week for sure. And then you get into next week and you might start seeing some of the attrition a little bit, maybe some movement on the coaching staff, whatever it may be. So it's coming, but I don't see Fred talking about it for a little while yet.
Parker?
It's interesting. At halftime, you're thinking like, I kept thinking when they won those 3 straight games, that's impressive, right? It doesn't matter who you are or what part of the season is or what your overall record is. Like, it's hard to win 3 straight games in the Big Ten, period, let alone do it on the road, let alone do it with how bad Nebraska had been up to that point. And I don't know that it would have felt a lot different if they would have won 1 game and lost to Iowa today or won 2 games or whatever. But like, Bez, what good did it do them to get hot late in the year at this point when you lose in the first round? They're going to have roster turnover and all that. Like, is there something to take from that little heater that will last beyond those 2 weeks? Or is it just sort of a flash in the pan for a team that's going to look entirely different again next year?
I think that's the question, because they kind of did the same thing last year too. Like, and it wasn't the same heater, but they played a lot better at the end of the year, and I think that more than anything, it raises the question is, why don't they do that the whole season? Why are they waiting until the last 2 weeks of the year to do it? That's happened the last 2 years. And again, this heater was way, way, way above what they did last year. They just played good, solid basketball last year for probably the last month. And this year for the last month, they started out solid, and then they just got red hot. And so it's fun to watch if you're a fan, and it's fun to watch when you've seen a lot of losses. But when it gets over, now that you've kind of had some time to think about it, you sit there and go, why in the world were they not doing this the whole year? It's the same group of guys, essentially, without Trey McGowan's, of course. But you also beat Wisconsin without Bryce McGowan. So missing one guy shouldn't make that much of a difference, you wouldn't think. So to me, I don't know that it makes a huge difference, like you said, with roster attrition, with any potential staff changes that may or may not happen, with potential, how you play the game, that sort of thing, if there's any changes there. So I don't know. I just think it raises the question of why does it take these teams so long to get going? I think it comes back to your original point. It's roster attrition, right? Like, you're resetting every year.
Yeah, exactly.
And they had a better core this year. I think they returned like 70% of their scoring from last year to this year, but you're still breaking in a lot of guys. Now you're looking at potentially losing at least 4 starters off of this team, maybe 5, and probably a bench guy or 2 as well. So you're going to essentially be resetting again for the most part, unless you can, convince Trey McGowan's and Derek Walker to come back and run it back again for another year. So, yeah, I don't know. To me, it's nice, and it shows that you can do it, and it shows those young guys that you can do it. So maybe you take that and you can point to that when you're in the off season and doing your training, and you turn that into a positive. But from the outside looking in, to me, it just screams like, where was this all year? Why did it take so long?
If I were a Nebraska fan, I think I'd be, I don't know that it would be a major concern, but a bit of a concern to me would be how much the bar has been lowered. Where I will hear fans say things like, man, next year, if Nebraska could just get to like 7-13 in the Big Ten. That's a lot of money to pay a guy to, in 4 years, make that minimal progress.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I guess. And, then what you always get is, come on, the program's never been successful, which is bullshit. That's a bullshit answer. I hate it, because they have had success. They've had really good teams in Nebraska that got to the NCAA and didn't do what they should have done. But the lowering of the standard here is a concern of mine. It's incredibly low right now. Man, if Nebraska can just win 6 in the league next year, what are we doing? Who gives a damn? I mean, I watch these teams like Indiana, I mean, make a beautiful comeback today to beat Michigan and get its program
in the second half.
Yeah, get its program going in the first year of what's it's not a direct comparison. I get it. Indiana was in a better situation, but you see these teams doing what they do. And by the way, you see Northwestern. Collins is 10-2 against Nebraska. I mean, this sort of stuff is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. They've made this. Has he been there for like 7 or 8 years and they made the tournament?
This was Collins' 7th year. They made the tournament once. This was his first Big Ten win since 2017, last night. In the tournament, in the tournament.
Yeah.
Come on.
So, yeah, I mean, no, I don't disagree with you, Sip. It's just, I just don't really know what to think yet until we see what these changes are. You know, it's so hard to know, like, does Doc come back? Does Matt Abdelmassih come back? You know, does Armand Gates come back? Do you change the way you construct a roster, build a roster? Do you change your recruiting approach? No, there's just so many variables right now, the day after the season's over, that it's hard to say. But your original point stands, Sipple. Like 7-13, like, oh, great, big deal. So you finished 10th in the conference instead of 13th. You know, and you know, if they had done that this year, then maybe okay, you're around 500 for the season.
Sure,
it's a little different story. But yeah, I think it's these next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it takes. Well, and not that they'll answer a lot of questions for us, but it'll maybe give us an idea of what direction this is going to go.
Yeah.
And better assess it.
The parallels to football go beyond just the fact that Trev Alberts restructured both Fred Hoiberg and Scott Frost contracts, right? I mean, the thing that was weird about thinking about Scott Frost when he said he knew he needed to make changes, part of that conversation is like, the further you venture from the core of how you've done things, on the one hand, the more it's going to seem like, wow, he's really embracing change. Wow, he's really willing to examine this and maybe do something really different. But also the more you're going to be likely to say, like, wait a second, so you're just going to change everything?
Yeah.
Like, how
are we
is
going
that
to reset this now?
Yeah. How's that going to work?
Right.
So you're just going to go away from everything or a lot of things
that's a great
done
point.
before. And that's fans are going to say, hey, this is great. Fred's going to play a different way. Maybe he's going to build a roster a different way. He's going to recruit a little differently. All this, just like Frost, you know, revamped his entire offensive staff, found a guy to call the plays, going to be more of a CEO. Like, the bigger the change, the more fans on the face are going to be willing to say, like, wow, hey, look, he's really going for it. But at the same time, like, what have we been saying all along about football? No matter what, no matter how good the coaches are you hire, no matter how solid the idea is, still feels a little bit like a long shot that you're actually going to pull it off in one off season and just have it take off. So it's sort of it's not exactly a catch-22, but it's a tough spot to be. You're asking a coach who's done things one way to like totally re-engineer it and have it work right away.
I'll say this: it's easier to do it in basketball than football.
Probably true. Yeah,
you don't need 30 guys in basketball.
Right.
You need 5 or 6, and you need the right mix of 5 or 6. And you know, I don't think you're going to see Nebraska on the court look dramatically different stylistically. They're still going to play up tempo. I think they're still going to want to space the floor, shoot threes, because that's what Fred's always done, and it's worked at this level. And it worked pretty damn good those last 3 games when they won 3 on the road, 2 of them against ranked teams. You know, so the system, the actual basketball part of it, I think can work. But you've got, I think where you're going to see the major changes are they've got to do something about how they build the roster to have more continuity. And that's where it starts. I think it may not look exactly the same as what Frost has done, where it's just these massive changes up and down the board, and it looks totally different from that standpoint. I think there will be changes, but I think you just have to take a really hard look at everything. And it's like Trev said, what they're doing isn't working. It hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for 3 years. So you've got to do something.
Yeah, I would be. Yeah, I've said it before. I don't mind saying it. I'll be shocked if Matt Abdelmassih's back, and I'll be shocked if Bryce McGowan is back. I will be shocked.
Well, yeah, I don't think anybody. Yeah, I don't think anybody expects Bryce McGowan's to be back. And that's kind of been pretty clear for most of the year. I think.
Yes.
I think most of us are operating under that assumption. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the coaching staff stuff will look like, and whether that's Fred sitting down with Matt and saying, "Hey, we need to approach this a different way." I just don't know how that will look. I don't know. I don't want to speculate because I don't know what it's going to look like. So, yeah, it's just so hard to kind of get your head around right now. And then if Nebraska had finished the year with 3 straight losses and gone up there and flamed out, it doesn't maybe change a whole lot, but it at least makes it maybe a little less kind of bizarre to look at than the way they did it, just playing so well those last 3 games and playing so well for 25 minutes last night.
I just don't think Fred Hoiberg right now, even if he didn't want to make changes, I just don't think he could legitimately go to the fan base essentially and say, I'm keeping everything the same.
You can't do that.
Can.
Yeah. No, yeah, you can't.
And Parker's heard it, as you've heard it. His boss has said, Trev Alberts is big on this notion of if you're not winning, you just can't keep doing the same things and expect different results. Yeah. So Fred will have to change. He'll have to make, I'd say, significant changes to appease his boss. But I think just as importantly, to show the fan base that he's doing something. I mean, how much patience can you ask for? I mean, yeah, the same question applies to Frost. Now, he made major changes, though. And he still doesn't have much time. We all agree that Frost has to get it going quick. Yeah. The runway for Frost is short. Now, will it be that way for Fred next year? I imagine it will be. I think Fred's got to make a big jump next year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I hate to cut this short because it's good talk, but I got to run. So
okay. I'll
turn it over to you guys. We'll touch more on this next week. Maybe we'll know a little more then. But at that point, I'll just turn it over to you guys now.
All right. Say hi to featured podcast guest Palmer for us.
Will do.
Yeah, we missed Palmer on this one.
He misses you guys too, terribly.
All right. God bless you. Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to tie a bow on the hoops conversation, Sipple? I mean, it's sort of.
Well, how about, yeah, we can tie a bow on it. I've wondered if I thought, now I will tell you this, Parker. I thought Nebraska would make a run at Indy. I was surprised by the result. I was really surprised by that result yesterday. I thought Nebraska would win the game by 10 plus.
Yeah.
And at halftime, with 15 minutes left, I felt pretty good. And I'm still a little bit startled that they couldn't hammer home that win.
Yeah, I told you before, yesterday when we were at football availability before the game that I thought Northwestern would win. But man, I mean, the way Nebraska played early on, you're like, you've seen it enough times this year where they play good for a while, or even more than like playing a good stretch of basketball for a while. It's sort of the flip side of like, you've seen those just go into these like cataclysmic periods of 6 or 8 or 10 minutes. And so even at halftime, that's sort of floating in the back of your mind, like, but it didn't look like it was going to happen. Nobody said, "Oh, it looks
no
like
indication."
No
indication it happened.
Wasn't. They were playing really good, and they were making shots. And Verge, I think Alonzo Verge. We talked about this last week, and Baz wrote about it as his advance for the game and all of that. But like, for as much crap as a guy took early in the year, he really played good basketball down the stretch. And it's
last 9 games, Parker. Last 9 games, strong.
And then last night, you look at, late in the game, when it was tight and when it was back and forth and the ball was in his hands a lot. And, I'm sure he wants to have the one back where he just put his head down and tried to plow to the rim. But, at one point he was standing at the free throw line. They showed his line and it was like 21, 9, and 7 or something like that. It's like, man, that's not, you don't just roll out of bed and do that, in high level college hoops or high major college hoops. So, I think he deserves a lot of credit. It's sort of like, this is a very odd comparison. The situations are really different, but his late season surge in a way, this is a very weird, it was a little bit like Luke Gifford in my mind. You know how by the end of the 2018,
interesting, yeah.
By the end of the 2018, I don't know if Luke had the same like ups and downs necessarily, but he was emerging to such a degree that you were like, man, if there's one guy you could see play one more year with that defensive coaching staff and think about the jump he could make. That's sort of like Verge. Like, you know, he gave a lot of credit to Nate Lenzer and the way that he was starting to come on in terms of like playing point guard. You just sort of, I mean, I know he's 6 years in college and he doesn't have any eligibility left, and I'm sure he's maybe ready to go do something else, but he's the guy who you're like, man, it'd be interesting to see what one more year.
Well, I thought he was, I mean, there weren't many guards in the league that could stay with him late in the season. I mean, he was getting a lot of what he wanted. I don't fault him for the play late where Boo Buie stepped in front of him. It was somewhat predictable. He heads down that rail a lot, you know, on the right side. That's kind of his go-to. And Boo Buie, I wonder if you asked Boo Buie, if Boo Buie would say, yeah, I was waiting for it. If that play is at all, if there's any inclination of his to drive, he's probably going to his right hand. He's probably going down that right rail. And it looked like to me like Buie was waiting for it.
Yeah.
And just
especially
here he comes. I'm stepping right in front.
If you're a good defender, it's probably in your mind, in part because you understand how hard the task is for the on-ball defender to stay in front of the guy. Like,
right.
Hey, be on sort of high alert, because if this guy puts, you know, he's going to put the ball on the deck and he's probably going to go by the primary defender, right? So like you need somebody, you know, he had that presence of mind to say, hey, look, we're going to need a secondary defender to step in and try to help, you know.
If you watch the play, Buie was he was on it. All he had to do was take a couple steps to his right and take the charge.
It's amazing. Easy. I mean, that's the margin, right? In the Big Ten, that's the margin. I mean, on the other end, you had not alert defense going under a screen on Buie. You know, Bryce McGowan's went under a ball screen on Buie and he canned a three with like 3 minutes left, I think, that was a huge shot in the game. So that's, you know, that can be the difference between win and losing, A, in March, B, like any given night in the Big Ten.
All right, keep talking. I'm going to put bullet out. Hold on.
We're down to one. For those of you watching, you can see what's happening. For those of you listening, now I'm awkwardly talking for a minute. So yeah, that's it. That's it for Nebraska basketball. We'll see sort of where it goes from here. There's interesting decisions ahead for Fred Hoiberg. He's obviously been loyal to Matt Abdelmassih his entire career, really, and especially in his college career. There's so many similarities, Sipple. Maybe this is a good like transition to football. You know, there's a lot of similarities between the situations. I mean, you know, Frost had been really loyal to Mario Verduzco, for example. Obviously different roles and all of that, but Frost at one point said that he didn't, you know, that Verduzco would be his quarterback's coach as long as he coached. And that was a situation they just had to sort of reevaluate, and obviously made the change and all of that. And it'll be interesting to see how far Fred Hoiberg is willing to go, or feels like he needs to go, in terms of making change.
Well, I don't know what you'd say. I don't think these are unilateral decisions. I don't think it's just, we'll see how far Fred decides to go.
The athletic director would tell you that they are unilateral decisions. But
yeah.
His opinion, like it matters in this conversation.
Yeah.
Just like it did in Scott's situation.
Right. I mean, yeah, you know, there's gray in that conversation, obviously, but you know, I mean, Fred's going to have to make some changes. That's in part because his boss is expecting him to, you know.
Well, it's sort of the part of this, like if Trev can say like that that's the coach's choices, but the coaches presented him with a plan that he either signed off on or didn't sign off on.
Right, exactly.
And
so it's semantics, Parker.
Yeah, yeah. The plan would not have been signed off on if it's like, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah, they are the coach's decisions, but that coach isn't there if he tells them. I mean, I hope I'm not making it too big of a leap here, but if Frost would have held firm and said, I'm not making any changes, I don't think Scott Frost is the coach right now.
I don't think you're making too big of a leap.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we're starting to see I don't know, C is probably putting it a little bit strong, but we're hearing a lot about the effect of those changes in football, right? We interviewed some of those changes on Wednesday this week over there as we transition to talking about football for the rest of the podcast here, or most of the rest of it. Heard from Mark Whipple again, second time this spring. Heard from the quarterbacks, including Casey Thompson and Chubba Purdy, the new guys on campus, Logan Smothers and Heinrich Harburg as well. Sipple, obviously, you've talked about this on the radio. We've written a lot about it already. We talked about it on videos that are on journalstar.com. But I guess try to find some fresh ground here for the podcast. It was interesting listening to Frost talk about the offense, I thought, just in terms of like what he's seen so far. And then also, like, it's not surprising, but Whipple saying, like, I just want to not turn the ball over during this scrimmage on Friday. Like, first downs and touchdowns would be great, but they're still kind of in the baseline in terms of building what they want to do offensively. Is what it seems
there's
like
things,
on the outside.
Yeah, there are things we know, though. I mean, let's not pretend like there's not. There's a lot we know if you really think about it. We know that you could say right now that the quarterback situation's crystallizing quite a bit, in my opinion.
Yes, correct.
With you would say Casey Thompson is the front runner. You could probably say with Chubba Purdy not practicing at full go, that Logan Smothers would have a leg up for the top, right behind. I don't know, right behind, but behind Casey Thompson. Chubba Purdy hasn't practiced full go. Now he says he expects to be back March 22nd when the team returns from spring break. Heinrich Harburg's in that discussion too, but it's pretty clear that he's behind Logan.
Yep.
So we know that. We know that they're going. Now, I thought it was really significant yesterday what they said about they're going under center more.
Yeah.
So one big change is footwork, because these guys have to learn a 5-step drop because they're going under center. That's something that's been a big discussion. It's always a pretty big discussion in a program, in a fan base that doesn't go under center. Now, Nebraska with Whipple and his NFL background is going under center. I thought that was big. We know they're moving fast. The tempo, they're trying to go with a lot of tempo. Logan Smothers said that. So we know there's stuff we know. I mean, we've learned quite a bit, actually, without seeing practice. Right. And that's what we always got to reiterate. We're not seeing anything. We're going off of what people are saying, but we also know they're going to scrimmage tomorrow. And we also know that Casey Thompson said yesterday that they've made enough progress that he almost feels like they could play a game. Now, I don't know what to think about that. That could
Frost said the exact opposite at the very outset of his news conference.
That could be just youthful exuberance, right? I mean,
and he's Casey. That was interesting though that he set out of 5 practices, like 3 or 4 of them he's felt like they were in that kind of rhythm offensively. It was. I think as we were getting going with Frost, Tom Chattel from the World Herald sized up the size of the media corps over there for Frost and said to Scott as he walked to the podium, "Who do you play this weekend?" And Frost said, "We don't play anybody this weekend. We're not going to be ready to play anyone for a long time." It's just a quip, I guess, in March, but it is. I mean, one of the things that I don't know how. I mean, I think you can look at Whipple's history and draw some conclusions on this. Like, if Nebraska has, people ask a lot about the run pass conversation, and there's a sense, I think, especially from the first day of spring ball when Nick Henrich said he thought that the offense on day one was running the ball downhill more, that sort of tripped this excitement in run the ball guy and his friends. But I would temper that a little bit, because at every turn Mark Whipple and Mickey Joseph have said categorically that they're going to throw the ball a lot. And Logan Smothers said yesterday, yeah, we're throwing the ball a lot. And so I think it's interesting because until you see it in action, Sipple, that there's going to be a level of consternation among fans, isn't there, on that front? I mean,
I think so. Yeah, I think, run the ball guy doesn't know what to think right now, that's okay. What I would say, and I've written it, I'll continue to say, I'll probably write it again. I think Whipple, with his NFL background, understands the importance of running the ball. Frost, big theme of last offseason was we got to run the ball. They just haven't. I mean, I just don't think if you coach in the Big Ten for 4 years, I don't think you come away from those 4 years going, you know what, we're just going to whip it around. I don't even think we have to run. I mean, I'm not worried about it. And again, I would reiterate, Whipple has a deep NFL background. I mean, he knows. He mentioned it yesterday too. You got to run it in the red zone for sure. You got to be able to run the ball in the red zone, right? He said that. The fact, Parker, the fact they're going to under center indicates that they're going to try to run. Yep. You heard his spiel. What part of his spiel was going under center helps the running back.
Yeah, it
helps that downhill game. So yeah, I would. If people are getting worried about it, all I would say is, well, they're practicing under center for the first time in I don't know how long. So I mean, trying to think back to Riley. Yeah, did they go under center under Riley? Yeah, but
they did.
Frost, they just don't do that.
Yeah,
now they do. Which tells me almost enough about the running game.
It's interesting that is going to be his answer about going under center and sort of the full spectrum of the run game and giving the running backs more gaps, more avenues was really interesting. And I think it's the longer this goes, like the further we get into this, Sipple, like you remember, I was thinking about this today, actually. Remember in November when Frost fired the 4 guys and then we talked to him in the middle of a week, like on a Wednesday or something. And he was talking about why he made the changes he made or fired the guys he fired and what he wanted to see and what he needed. And there was some real skepticism at that point that he would actually turn the keys over offensively. Like, I think that was part of the conversation. Like, well, he's not really going to give up play calling duties, is he? Like, he might say that, but like,
what have you learned?
Yeah, he did. I mean, he really did. Like, a lot of the run game stuff, some of it, especially the stuff out of the gun, like schematically, I think it'll look different. Like, we've heard that a little bit, like a lot of stuff that Frost likes in the run game is going to stay in, especially some of the quarterback run stuff. But I don't think at this point, and we'll see what it looks like, but with all of the things that we've heard so far this spring, if I were to guess right now, since we haven't actually seen it, I'm going to guess that this is going to look like a Mark Whipple offense more than it looks like a Scott Frost offense.
Yeah, with Whipple running it. Yeah, one of the things that's become clear, and I think people probably picked up on it, but it might be okay to mention that you always hear this coming from players and assistant coaches that Whipple's in charge of the offense.
Yeah.
What have you heard from Mickey Joseph, for instance? We want Frost. We hope Frost pokes his head in and gives us input.
Right.
Well, I mean, yeah. So that indicates to me that there's somebody else in charge, right?
Right. Yeah. And
Frost,
I just think,
go ahead.
Yeah, that's become clear, but sometimes things become clear, especially like when you're around it all the time. And I think sometimes it's worth stepping back and acknowledging that in November, I don't think I would have told you, on March 10th, we're going to be talking about somebody else's offense.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think you would. That would have been a guarantee at all on November 10th.
No, I think you have to step back sometimes, or a lot. You have to really step back in this market because we talk so much, and there's so much coverage. But I think you're absolutely right. I know when we were sitting down with Trev in November, what was it, right, November 9th, right after the changes. And he was talking about this CEO role. Yeah, my first thought was, oh, is Frost really how much is he going to want to step back?
Right.
Well, it appears he has talked himself about going over to the defense in practice, which he says he didn't do a lot of. He's done it before, but he feels more comfortable doing it now. He talked about going and working with other groups. Doesn't have to stay with the offense all the time, because why? Because Whipple is in charge of the offense.
Right.
I mean, that's it. I mean, I know. No, you're right. I don't know that we could have said that definitively in December or whenever, but now it's March, whatever the hell it is, March 10th.
Yeah.
And I think you can say Whipple is in charge of the offense.
Yeah. I just think that's I just think it's sort of interesting that it's revealed itself that clearly. Now, Frost is still involved, obviously.
He's the head coach. Everything, like Mickey said the other day, at the end of the day, any CEO, pretty much any CEO in this world is the CEO because he makes all the final decisions.
Yeah. Right.
But how can you make all the final decisions on everything if you're not plugged in on everything? So that's, CEO role probably makes sense. Parker, I've said it to you in the last couple of years. I'm much more comfortable with the CEO type coach than I am a play caller. Mm-hmm. With a guy like the guy at the Bears, it was always, a lot of guys are like this. They're buried in the play sheet. I just don't think of them as head coaches. Yeah. The guys who call plays on offense that have their heads buried, it's hard for me to think of them as head coaches. Even though Sean McVay, did he call plays for the world champion Rams? He seems to make it work well.
Yeah, Ryan Day seems to make it work pretty well.
Yeah, guys do. Well, we'll see about Ryan Day, by the way.
People keep saying that, and he just keeps winning.
Well, he was one loss away from being in hot water. 3 losses at Ohio State is hot water. I mean, He was a touchdown away. He was a Rose Bowl loss away, and that was close from being in legit hot water. I mean,
got it done.
He got rid of his defensive coordinator, though.
I know. And he hired a guy with 35 years of experience who's going to call the defense.
Right. But I'm telling you, I watched the press conference when he was introduced, and Gene Smith patted him on the shoulder and said, "We expect to win them all of them."
That was crazy. That was that was
all of them. 3 losses,
all of them.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
At any rate, it was. That was a fascinating moment for sure.
Interesting to hear Whipple. I just think it's one of the things about this, and we can wrap it up shortly here. I think it's interesting to just watch the pieces come together. Like the coaching pieces. Like when we talked to these guys in December, like when we talked to Whipple, December 15th, we talked to Whipple and Mickey Joseph, and one other, Donovan Raiola, I guess. And they didn't know each other, like they'd all met each other like the week before. And Mickey and Whipple had maybe been out recruiting a day or two together. And then on the first day of spring ball, they kind of walked in together. They're cracking jokes. Like they've had a couple months of watching film and all of that. And now like Whipple's up there talking about, oh yeah, Chins gave us some good looks on blitzes. And it's a fascinating, just sort of fascinating to watch the whole like dough try to pull together, for lack of a better analogy. It's unclear if it's all going to work, obviously. But it's pretty darn interesting watching the process unfold.
Yeah. Now I'm going to ask a question. It would frustrate you. It's not really a question. It's a question statement, but how fascinating would it be tomorrow if we could watch that scrimmage?
Oh, yeah.
My God.
I know.
I would
so if anybody out there who is going to the scrimmage that can go to the scrimmage, former players, if you got like the Periscope stream or whatever, hit me up. I won't say anything.
Yeah, hit us. We'll see some of it.
FaceTime. Come on.
Yeah, I'm with you on this. It's not hard, but as frustrating as that is, this stuff I find it very easy to write about because it's really interesting. It's a really interesting period,
And the guys that have are back, right? Like most of them have big projects too. That's the thing about it. Like it's not just an offensive conversation. Like Travis Fisher has 7 new scholarship guys in his room. Even Sean Beckton is trying to replace a Big Ten tight end of the year, and he's trying to get a lot out of Thomas Fedoni early in his career, like one of the biggest recruits Nebraska's had in the past several years. Mike Dawson has a big challenge on his hands. We talked about that the last couple of weeks about the defensive interior and all of that. Like it's all, Bill Bush trying to engineer an entire special teams turnaround.
Well, he has a new punter and a new place kicker.
Right.
And a new return man return man.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't. Yeah. I mean, sometimes when I get a little nervous, Parker, like, whoa, man, what are we going to write about now? Come on. I mean, it can't be that hard. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also think people like readers, viewers, listeners, consumers of our content shouldn't misconstrue or conflate interest and enthusiasm for covering something that's really interesting with
expectation of success.
Expectations that's going to work. Yeah. It's fascinating.
No,
I have no idea. I have no idea if it's going to work.
No, open-minded.
Yeah. They might be good. They might not be. I have no idea. It's hard. How could you say right now, given all the things that have changed?
No, I know. I'm really open-minded. And I probably trend towards skeptical more than anything. Because these changes are massive. And not so much even in the coaching realm. They're counting on a lot of new faces, 16 new scholarship guys at spring camp. A lot has to pull together, and you have to keep in mind they're in maybe the best league in the country. And we all pretty much agree, I think it's the best coached league in the country. So you got to, a lot of these other coaches are working in systems that are well established, particularly in your division. With Wisconsin and Iowa, they're not making changes. Iowa's tape in 2021 looks much like it did in 2011. In Wisconsin, probably, I think you'd say probably the same thing. Maybe not 211, but whatever. They're not making radical changes.
In 2011, they were running a 3-4, and Paul Christ was their offensive coordinator. So,
see, there you go. Thank you, Parker. So,
Minnesota changed coordinators, and the guy they hired was the guy who was there when they built the offensive system that they've been running, basically.
So I always try, that's a big picture discussion, but I always try to hammer that home. You are competing against these teams right in your division with established systems, and you have blown up a lot of your system.
Yeah.
On offense or a share of it. And for sure, you have these new faces on the coaching staff, including a new offensive coordinator. So that's what you're battling. Think about Northwestern. They lost their defensive coordinator, Hankwitz, and it hurt them last year. But this is Fitzgerald for 14 years, right? Even now, you'd start to say Purdue. There's continuity at Purdue, and it's showing. You can't tell me that Nebraska has any sort of edge at this point on Purdue.
No.
Right.
Why would you?
Right.
Hasn't Purdue won 2 of the last 3?
Yeah. Minnesota, same way. Right in your division, there's these established coaches with established systems, and you're undergoing this massive undertaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I trend towards skeptical, that's why.
Yeah. Yep. It's going to be interesting. 4 weeks to the spring game. This sort of is worth pointing out. Nebraska, no spring practice next week. They're on spring break. And then back to it for 3 weeks. And then the end of that 3rd week is the spring game on April 9th. So,
all right, we're going to wrap this up.
Yeah. Friday's practice number 6 out of 15. They're rolling forward. Anything else for the good of the cause? Women's.
You have a story. Yeah. You have a story looking ahead to the scrimmage tomorrow. I have a column on Logan Smothers, which is basically about how appealing it is that he says he never considered. In fact, he was asked, Parker, one other thing. It was really interesting. I was listening to the tape. He was asked the question, a very sort of leading question. When did you decide to return to Nebraska?
Yeah.
And he said, well, I never considered leaving. That's really interesting to me. Just that little bit of that conversation with him yesterday. The question was, when did you decide to return to Nebraska? Well, the answer was, I never considered leaving, and I'm here for the long haul. That's what Smothers says. That's a very appealing answer in this day and age. That he says, I'm here. This is what I want. Competition. I love it.
Yeah.
So I really like the kid. He doesn't overstate things. He doesn't appear to be an overthinker. And I have a lot of regard for Logan Smothers.
Yeah, so do I. I mean, he's been. I think it's worth remembering. Like, he committed to Frost. He verbally committed to Frost before Frost ever coached a game at Nebraska. Like, that's how long. Even though he's going into his third year in college, but he legitimately verbally committed in like June of 2018, before Frost ever coached a game, and he's not, as you said, he has not wavered on it. He's got as much playing time essentially. He and Purdy, different skill sets a little bit, but they have roughly the same amount of playing experience, similar situations. They both started a game, injury situation, have some time in other games, but are mostly unproven. And I think that's a pretty good. We'll see if Hoiberg can make a big jump, but Purdy versus Smothers would be a pretty good race for the number 2 job.
Yeah, and I'd say Smothers has a leg up right now because he's available.
Yep, no doubt. I think we'll call it there. Women's hoops obviously bowed out in the semis to Iowa in the Big Ten tournament. Selection shows on Sunday. Amy Williams and the crew surely are going dancing. We'll find out Sunday what the seed line and where they're headed for the quad. I was talking to your partner at the Sip and Sam showdown there, Sipple. Ames, Iowa would be interesting. Iowa State, Iowa, and Nebraska on a little quad there in Ames. That'd be an interesting one. That was Sam's.
Oh, that'd be fascinating. Yeah, Nebraska and Iowa State had quite a history in women's basketball for a period when they were in the same league, obviously. But they were great battles. Great battles.
Is that when you were on the road on the women's hoops beat?
Oh yeah, used to go to Ames quite a bit, cover those games. Yeah.
Someday we're going to do an entire podcast that's just stories of you on the road covering women's.
Well, it was one story that I tell all the time, and it's how that Sipple's Lost T-shirt came to be. I was young, Parker. I was in my 20s, and when I left town, it was one of those March days. It was incredibly warm, like it was 90, 80 degrees. And all I took in my truck was I had a tank top and a T-shirt. And I had the tank top on driving over there.
Hey, you were going to Ames?
Going to Ames, yeah. My pickup. And I had an old pickup at the time. And then when I came out of the arena in Ames late that night, the ramp going up to where the parking lot was covered in ice. You could hardly get up the ramp walking, and the wind was blowing about 60 miles an hour, and the temperature had dropped to about 12. I didn't have a coat, and my truck was in bad shape. And all I could think was, if this truck dies on the interstate, I'm dying on the interstate.
Yeah, it's
right. She was late at night.
Stephen M. Sipple
coming back at 1:30 with no coat. Yeah, it was a disaster. It was largely a disaster. But yeah, that was That was
so did you actually lose your T-shirt?
No, I don't know why. I don't think that. No, I had the T-shirt.
Got it. But that was the story that spawned.
Yeah. That's all I had was a T-shirt and a tank top.
Well, if you learn nothing about basketball or football on this podcast, at least you learned that.
Yeah. So there you go. Thanks, Parker.
You bet.
Get right.
Good one. We'll have Baz back full time next week. Obviously, he's just getting back from Indianapolis today. A lot of stuff coming down the pike, both spring football wise and obviously hoops wise. Women still playing, men in for an interesting few weeks. So we'll call it there for Sipple. I'm Parker. Thanks for listening and watching. We'll talk to you next week.